It's just, I mean, it's all too much sometimes, you know? I miss her.
He shrugged. I wanted to. None of this would have happened if it wasn't for you. This isn't just my shop, it's ours. I want people to know that. For a moment, I couldn't speak. There had been a time not long ago when my own son couldn't even stand to sit at the same table with me, when he had called me useless and turned his back. And now here he was, honoring me in the most tangible way he could, by putting my name on something he built with his own 2 hands. I nodded slowly. Then let's make sure we build something worth putting our names on. From that day forward, we worked side by side, sanding tables, fixing old chairs, restoring engines that had been collecting dust for decades. Each project became a conversation, each repair a lesson, not just in mechanics but in life. Noah began to open up more as we worked. He told me about the fear he had felt after I left, how the house felt empty, how he had sat staring at the note I left, wondering if he'd ever see me again. He admitted that at first, he had been angry, convinced I had abandoned him just to prove a point. But as time passed and his life unraveled, he realized it wasn't abandonment. It was a wake-up call. I thought I had everything figured out, he said one day while tightening a bolt. But I didn't know how to handle failure. I didn't know how to handle life without you cleaning up my messes. I smiled faintly. That's the thing about growing up, son. One day you've got to pick up your own mess. And sometimes the only way to learn is to make one big enough that you have no choice but to face it. He chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, I definitely did that. The shop became a place of healing for both of us. There was no overnight fix, no magical moment where all the hurt disappeared. But day by day, trust was being rebuilt. Respect was being earned on both sides. I stopped seeing Noah as just my boy who needed guidance. I began to see him as a man, one who had faced failure and gotten back up. And Noah stopped seeing me as just the father who hovered in the background. He began to see me as a person, someone with his own struggles, dreams, and dignity. One evening, as the sun set behind the workshop, Noah turned to me and said, "You know, I used to think respect was something people owed me just because of who I was, because I worked hard or because I had plans for my life. But now I know it's something you have to earn over and over again." I nodded. That's true. Respect is like trust. It's not given once and done. You have to keep earning it every day, and you've been doing just that. He smiled, then a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen in years. I couldn't have done it without you. Even when you weren't there, you were still teaching me. And that, I think, was the moment I knew we had both grown. When I left that night and drove back to the cabin, I didn't feel like I was leaving anymore. I felt like I was simply going home to rest, so I could come back the next day and keep building, not just tables and chairs, but a stronger future. Over time, word about the shop began to spread. People brought us broken furniture, old bicycles, engines that hadn't run in years, and together we brought them back to life. In a way, that's what we had done for ourselves too. The day Noah hung an open sign on the door, we stood, there side by side, just looking at it for a moment. "You ready?" he asked. I smiled. "I think we've been ready for a while now." And as the first customer walked in, I realized something important. My leaving hadn't destroyed my relationship with my son. It had saved it. It forced us both to grow, to see each other for who we really were, and to build something stronger than what we had before. Life doesn't always give you a clean slate, but it does give you second chances if you're willing to take them. And this was ours. Life has a way of testing us, doesn't it? Sometimes the hardest thing we can do is walk away from the people we love. Not out of anger, but out of self-respect. When I left, I didn't know if Noah would ever understand why. But by giving him the space to fall, to face his own failures, and to find his own strength, we both grew in ways we never could have if I had stayed. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Sometimes love doesn't mean holding on tighter. Sometimes it means stepping back and letting someone figure out who they really are. And when they do, you might just find that the bond between you is stronger than ever. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to make a painful choice, like this? To walk away from someone you loved because you knew it was the only way for them to grow? Did they come back into your life? Or did you have to learn to find peace on your own? Share your story in the comments below. You never know. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story touched you, hit that like button so we can share it with more people who might need this reminder. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Stories about family, redemption, and the quiet courage it takes to stand up for yourself. We post new stories every week, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Because sometimes the most powerful journeys begin the moment you decide it's time to stop being silent. I paid off my debts, he said. All of them. It took every paycheck, every extra hour I could get, but I did it. And he hesitated, then smiled sheepishly. I started helping out Mrs. Callahan down the road. You know, the lady with the broken fence. I fixed it for her, no charge. I couldn't help but smile. That was the boy I had raised, the one who once gave up his allowance to buy canned food for a neighbor's dog. Sounds like you're starting to understand what I've been trying to teach you all these years, I said quietly. He nodded, his expression serious. I am, and I don't expect you to just forget everything I said. But I want you to know, I'm not the same man who called you useless. There was a lump in my throat as I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just my son, but the man he was becoming. For the first time in months, I felt pride, not the pride of a father who provided everything, but the pride of a man who had let his son fall and now saw him learning to stand. As we said goodbye that day, I realized something important. This was no longer just about forgiveness. This was about rebuilding trust, one brick at a time, and I was finally ready to start building again. A few weeks after running into Noah at the hardware store, I got another letter, but this one was different. The handwriting was firm, almost steady this time. Inside was just one line and an address. I want you to see what I've been working on. N. I hesitated. Part of me wondered if I was ready for this, if seeing him again so soon would undo all the progress I had made finding peace in my solitude, but something about that letter pulled me in. The next morning, I got in my truck and drove to the address. It was an old, run-down property on the edge of town, one I recognized immediately. It used to be an abandoned workshop that had been falling apart for years. But as I stepped out of the truck, I could see that someone had been working hard, very hard, to bring it back to life. The windows had been repaired, the doors rehung, and the once overgrown lot was cleared and neat. Noah was there, standing by the front steps, his hands covered in paint and dirt. You came, he said, smiling with a mix of relief and pride. I nodded slowly, taking in the place. You did all this? He nodded. Yeah. Been saving every penny, spending my weekends here. I'm turning it into a small repair shop. Figured, you taught me everything I know about fixing things, and maybe it's time I do something with that. Something that would make you proud. Something inside me cracked open then. Not from pain this time. From pride. He gestured toward the inside. Come look. I stepped into the workshop and was hit with a wave of nostalgia. The smell of sawdust and oil reminded me of my own garage back home, where I'd spent countless nights teaching him how to turn a wrench. Workbenches lined the walls, organized and clean. Tools hung neatly. There was a small sign on the far wall, still half-painted, that read, Noah's Repair and Restoration. I turned to look at him. This is good work. He nodded, swallowing hard. I didn't just build it for me, I built it for us. I thought maybe we could work here together. When you're ready. For a moment I couldn't speak. I had left my life behind to find myself, to teach him a lesson. And here he was, not just asking for forgiveness, but building something tangible to prove he had changed. You know, I said finally, my voice rough. This is the first time in a long time I've felt like you really see me. Not just as the guy who raised you, but as a man. He stepped closer. I do see you, Dad, and I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. There was a long pause before I finally let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. You've grown up, I said quietly. He nodded. I had to. I looked around one last time before meeting his eyes. Then maybe it's time I stop hiding out in that cabin. Maybe it's time we start over. The relief on his face was almost overwhelming. His shoulders dropped, and for the first time in a long time I saw that same boy who used to run into my arms after school. Thank you, he said, voice thick with emotion. Don't thank me yet, I said with a faint smile. This is just the start. Trust takes time to rebuild, respect takes time to earn, but I'm willing to try it if you are. I am, he said firmly. We spent the rest of the afternoon in that workshop, side by side, sanding down a workbench, fixing a loose hinge, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in years, it felt like we were building something together, not just a shop, but a future. As the sun dipped low in the sky and the light poured through the dusty windows, I realized this was what I'd been waiting for. Not an apology, not just words, but proof that my son had grown into the kind of man I could stand beside, not just look after. And in that moment I knew the worst was behind us. The following weeks felt different, lighter somehow, like the air around me had shifted. I still went back to the cabin each night, but it no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a choice. And when I woke up each morning, I had something to look forward to again. Noah kept showing up at the workshop even on days when I wasn't there. He'd leave me notes on the workbench, updates on the repairs, ideas for how to organize the space better, sometimes just a quick, hope you're doing okay. Little by little, I started spending more time there too. At first, I only stayed for an hour, fixing a tool or giving him advice on some wiring. Then 2 hours. Then entire afternoons. The place was slowly transforming, not just physically, but spiritually. It wasn't just a workshop anymore. It was a bridge between us. One day, I showed up to find that Noah had painted the sign completely. Joe and Noah's Restoration. Shop, it read in clean, bold letters. You didn't have to put my name on it, I said, my voice quiet. I lost everything, Dad, he said, his voice low. The job, the apartment, I even had to sell the car. I kept thinking I could handle it all on my own, that I didn't need anyone. But I was wrong. I needed you. I still do. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting his words settle in the air. You're not a child anymore, Noah, I said finally. You can't just need me when things are good, or when it's convenient. You called me useless because you thought I wasn't giving you anything anymore. But that's not how family works. Respect isn't something you get to withhold like a paycheck. He swallowed hard, blinking back tears. I know that now. I leaned forward, my hands clasped. I didn't leave to punish you. I left because I couldn't stay in a place where I wasn't respected. I had to find myself again, the man I used to be before I was just Dad. And I did. He nodded, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I didn't need anyone. But when I lost you, it felt like the ground disappeared under my feet. For the first time in months, I reached across the table and put a hand on his. Maybe that's what needed to happen, I said softly. Sometimes you have to lose everything before you can see what really matters. Noah nodded, his shoulders shaking as he let out a long, shuddering breath. I can't ask you to come back, he said. But I want you to know I'm going to change. I'm going to be better. I nodded slowly. I believe you. But this isn't about me coming back. This is about you standing on your own 2 feet. Respect isn't something you can just say. You have to live it. We sat there for a long time after that, not saying much. It wasn't the kind of conversation that ends with a neat resolution, a hug, and everything going back to the way it was. No, this was something deeper. When Noah finally stood to leave, he looked lighter, as though some invisible weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "Thank you," he said quietly. I nodded. "Go live your life, son. Show me you mean it." He nodded back, his eyes red but determined. "I will." And as I watched him walk back out into the snow, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. After Noah left the cabin, that night I stayed by the fire for hours, staring into the embers until they turned to ash. His words echoed in my head. "I'm going to be better." I wanted to believe him, but belief is dangerous when it comes to the people we love. I had spent years believing in him, defending him, making excuses for him. And look where it had gotten me, sitting alone in a cabin, licking wounds I never thought my own son would inflict. The next few weeks were quiet. Too quiet. Part of me wondered if Noah had gone back to his old ways, saying what he needed to say just to clear his conscience, then slipping right back into the same habits that had driven me away. But then one morning I found a letter on my porch. It was from Noah. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakable. Inside was a note, short and simple. "Dad, I found a new place to stay, got a job again. It's not much, but it's a start. I'm trying to fix things, not just with you, but with me. I hope you'll see that someday." Noah, I sat on the porch holding that letter for a long time, the cold morning air biting at my fingers. For the first time in months, I felt something shift. Not the sharp ache of anger or the hollow ache of loss, but something gentler. Hope. Days turned into weeks, and every so often another letter would arrive. Sometimes he wrote about his new job, sometimes about how hard it was staying disciplined and rebuilding his life. He didn't ask me to come back. He didn't beg. He just kept showing me, one page at a time, that he was trying. It was almost enough to make me get in my truck and drive back home. Almost. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to go into town for supplies. When I stepped into the little hardware store, I froze, because there, standing by the counter, was Noah. He looked different. His posture was straighter, his face less tired, but there was still that trace of humility in his eyes. "Dad," he said, surprised but relieved. I nodded slowly. "Didn't expect to see you here." He smiled faintly. "I come here sometimes. They hired me on part-time last month. Been saving up, trying to get back on my feet." I studied him for a moment. There was no bravado, no false pride. Just a man doing the work he needed to do. "That's good," I said finally. "It suits you." He nodded, almost shy. "I've been meaning to tell you something." We stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, and he took a deep breath. I didn't ask to see it. I wasn't ready for that. But I knew immediately that it had to be Noah. He must have finally started looking for me. Part of me felt a flash of satisfaction. He had called me useless, said he didn't need me, and now he was the one searching. But another part of me felt something heavier, guilt mixed with an ache I couldn't quite name. Meanwhile, word drifted through the grapevine, bits and pieces from neighbors back home, about Noah's situation. He'd been struggling. First it was small things, late rent, unpaid bills, then bigger things like losing his job after missing too many deadlines. People said he looked thinner, more tired. The spark he once had was fading. I told myself this was exactly what I wanted, for him to learn that life without me wasn't so easy. But when I lay in bed at night staring at the wooden ceiling, I couldn't shake the image of my son sitting alone at the table, head in his hands. I knew what that felt like. The truth was, Noah wasn't the only one who had to grow. My whole life I had defined myself by what I could do for other people, by how much I could give, how much I could sacrifice. Leaving forced me to face a question I had avoided for decades. Who was I when no one needed me? The answer surprised me. I was someone who could still build, still create, still find purpose, even if it wasn't tied to someone else's approval. I was someone who could still laugh, still enjoy a sunset, still feel proud of a day's work. And yet, for all the peace I had found, there was still a hole in my chest. The bond between father and son doesn't just disappear. It frays, it stretches, it hurts. but it doesn't break completely. One evening, as winter began to creep in, I stood on the porch watching the first snow fall. The air was crisp and the world was quiet. That's when I saw headlights coming down the dirt road toward the cabin. My heart pounded. It was him. Even before I could make out his face, I knew it. The way he parked, the way he stepped out of the car and stood there for a moment just breathing. I had seen that body language 1,000 times before. Noah had found me. He looked older, worn down, like life had sanded away the cockiness that used to sit on his face. He didn't shout. He didn't demand. He just stood there staring at me, his breath visible in the cold air. "Dad," he said finally, his voice cracking. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a visit. This was the beginning of something much bigger. A reckoning for both of us. Noah stood in the falling snow like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the wind and the faint crunch of his boots as he finally stepped closer. I stayed on the porch, hands in my pockets, heart hammering. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways: anger, shouting, maybe even tears. But now that it was happening, all I felt was an aching stillness. "Dad," he said again, softer this time. I nodded, but didn't invite him in. "You found me," I said quietly. He nodded too, his breath ragged. "Yeah, it took a while." The silence between us stretched, heavy and cold. I could see it on his face, the exhaustion, the regret, the pride he was forcing himself to swallow just to stand here. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, the words tumbling out of him as if they had been waiting for months. "For what I said, for how I treated you. I was angry and stupid. I didn't mean it." I stayed quiet. Part of me wanted to run to him, to grab him by the shoulders and tell him it was all right, that I forgave him. But another part of me knew this was bigger than a simple apology. "You said I was useless," I reminded him, my voice calm but sharp. "Do you still believe that?" He flinched. "No. God, no. I didn't mean it. I just..." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. "I was so caught up in everything, in my own problems, in trying to prove myself. I took it out on you and I shouldn't have. And when you left..." His voice cracked, and he looked down at his boots. "When you left, everything fell apart. I didn't know how much I depended on you until you were gone." I exhaled slowly, my breath clouding in the cold air. "You thought you were better off without me." Nodded miserably. "Yeah, and I was wrong." For a moment I just watched him. My son, the boy I had raised, now standing in front of me as a man humbled by life. And in that moment something shifted inside me. I had left to save myself, but maybe, just maybe, my leaving had saved him too. "Come inside," I said finally, stepping back from the door. He hesitated, as if unsure if he deserved it, then followed me in. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling softly. I motioned for him to sit at the small wooden table while I poured us both a cup of coffee. We sat there in the quiet for a while, the firelight flickering across his tired face. Finally, he spoke. "The first few days after I left were the hardest. My body was on autopilot. Wake up, brew coffee, stare out at the empty woods outside my rented cabin. But my mind was running circles around itself. I kept hearing Noah's words over and over. "You're useless." They echoed in my head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. I'd spent years teaching him about respect, about family, about the value of hard work. Where had I gone wrong? I replayed every moment of his childhood in my head, the scraped knees I patched, the nights I stayed up while he was sick, the mornings I left for work before sunrise just so he'd have lunch money. It all felt like a movie playing in slow motion, except I couldn't change the ending. The cabin was small but quiet, a single room with a wood stove, a table, and a bed that creaked every time I turned over. At night, the only sound was the wind through the trees. At first, the silence was unbearable. I had spent decades living in a house full of noise, Slamming doors, clinking plates, the hum of the TV. And now there was nothing but the sound of my own thoughts. I filled my days with little tasks to keep myself busy. I chopped firewood, repaired the old door hinges, cleaned every corner of the cabin until it felt like mine. It was strange at first, but slowly, I began to feel a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. No one was calling me to fix something. No one was criticizing how I did things. No one was telling me I wasn't enough. For the first time in my life, I was living for me. But even as I started to find peace, a part of me couldn't stop wondering what Noah was doing. Had he even noticed I was gone? Had he walked into the house, seen my note, and felt anything at all? I imagined him sitting at the kitchen table reading the note and just tossing it aside. Maybe he even felt relieved. After all, he'd gotten what he wanted. But life has a way of forcing you to see the value of what you've lost. Weeks turned into months, and from what little I heard through neighbors or mutual acquaintances, Noah's life wasn't going as smoothly as he had planned. The promotion he was counting on at work didn't come through. A bad investment drained most of his savings. He started missing deadlines, making mistakes, losing friends. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine it clearly. I knew him better than anyone. The boy I had raised was smart, but he wasn't used to failing. He had grown up in a house where every problem was solved before it could hurt him. When the roof leaked, I fixed it. When the car broke down, I repaired it. When he got into trouble at school, I was the one who marched into the principal's office and stood up for him. But now there was no one to shield him from the consequences of his choices. And that's when the guilt started creeping in. I would sit on the cabin porch in the evenings, the sun setting behind the trees, and wonder if I had abandoned him when he needed me most. I had walked away to teach him a lesson. But what if the lesson broke him instead of making him stronger? Still, I reminded myself, I didn't leave out of anger. I left because I needed to save myself. There comes a point where staying in a place where you're not valued starts to eat away at who you are, and I wasn't willing to let that happen. Slowly, I began to rebuild a life for myself. I planted a small garden behind the cabin. I started going into the nearest town once a week, making small talk with the locals. There was an old hardware store where I'd linger for hours, chatting with the owner about tools and old car parts. More time passed, the more I realized I wasn't just hiding out. I was healing. But somewhere, deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Because no matter how far I ran, no matter how quiet my life became, there was still a bond between us. Father and son. Blood and bone. One day I knew he would come looking for me, and when he did, I had no idea whether I'd be ready to face him. As the seasons changed, so did I. By the time autumn rolled in, I was stronger than I had been in years, physically and mentally. My hands were calloused again. My back no longer ached from sitting in the same chair every day. I felt a kind of freedom that I hadn't known was possible. But freedom is a double-edged sword. It gives you room to breathe, but it also gives you space to think, and too much thinking can turn a quiet evening into a battlefield. There were nights when I sat by the fire, staring into the flames, wondering if Noah hated me now. Did he think I had abandoned him? Did he even realize why I left? Or did he think I was punishing him? I had no way of knowing because I hadn't heard from him. Not a single call, not a single text. The silence was deafening. One night while driving into town for supplies, I stopped at a gas station. The man behind the counter, someone I had gotten to know over the last few months, asked how I was doing. Better, I said with a small smile. He nodded, then hesitated. You know, I think I saw someone who looked like you on a flyer in town the other day. Said something about missing family. My heart stopped. It started with little things, small cracks in the foundation I had spent a lifetime building. Noah would visit less often, and when he did, he seemed distracted, always half on his phone, half listening to me. I'd ask about his work, about how he was holding up, but his answers grew shorter every time. Busy. Fine. Yeah, things are good. I tried not to take it personally. After all, I knew what it was like to be young, to feel like the world was waiting for you, to conquer it. I told myself he was just focused, maybe even a little overwhelmed. But deep down I began to feel something I had never felt with my own son before: distance. One evening, I invited him over for dinner. I made his favorite dish, pot roast, slow cooked the way he liked it. The smell filled the house, just like it used to when he was a kid. I even set the table the way I used to, with the good plates, the ones I kept for special occasions. When he arrived, I could see the exhaustion on his face, but there was something else there too, a kind of sharpness, as though just being here was an inconvenience. He barely touched the food. I asked him how work was going, and he sighed like I had just asked the most annoying question in the world. "It's fine, Dad." "You wouldn't really understand," he said, scrolling through his phone. That stung. It wasn't the first time he had dismissed me, but this time it cut deeper. I had spent decades building a life with my bare hands, learning things the hard way, and now my own son was telling me I wouldn't understand responsibility. I tried to brush it off. "Well, maybe I don't understand your job," I said quietly, "but I do understand hard work. That hasn't changed." He didn't look up. "You don't get it, Dad. The world isn't like it was when you were my age. Things move fast. People can't just work themselves to death like you did and expect it to pay off. You were lucky. I have to be smart about my choices." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to fight. Still, a little piece of me cracked inside. The next few months were worse. He stopped coming by altogether. Calls went unanswered. I'd leave voicemails just to hear the sound of my own voice, reminding myself I still mattered to him. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those quiet days where the world feels like it's standing still. Noah stopped by unannounced, which should have been a good sign. But the moment he walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. His jaw was tight, his words clipped. "Dad, we need to talk," he said. I sat down, bracing myself. He stood there, arms crossed, like a man about to deliver a verdict. "You can't keep living like this," he said flatly. "You're just sitting here, doing nothing. You're not contributing anymore. You're wasting your life, and honestly—" He hesitated for half a second, then let the words fall like a hammer. "You're useless." The silence that followed was deafening. Didn't yell, I didn't defend myself. I didn't tell him about the decades I'd spent breaking my back for him, or the sacrifices I made so he'd never go without. None of it seemed worth saying. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the man my boy had become. My chest felt hollow, my throat tight, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "Is that what you really think of me?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "I'm just being honest. You need to figure out what you're going to do with yourself, Dad. I can't keep worrying about you. I have my own life to live, that was it. No apology, no kindness. Just those words hanging in the air like smoke after a fire." I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. "All right," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm, even, for me. "You don't have to worry about me anymore." He looked at me, confused, but I didn't give him a chance to ask what I meant. I walked to my room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor until the sun went down. That night I packed a small bag, just the essentials, some clothes, my work gloves, an old photograph of Noah as a boy. I left, my keys on the counter along with a short note: "Take care of yourself." Before dawn, I was gone. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I just walked out into the cold air, loaded my bag into my truck, and drove. As the miles passed and the city disappeared behind me, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living for anyone else. I wasn't trying to prove my worth to a world that had forgotten me. But as much as I tried to convince myself I was doing the right thing, part of me wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Would he even notice I was gone? Would he care? Or would he simply go on with his life, glad to be rid of me? Those questions haunted me as I drove deeper into the night. Questions that wouldn't be answered for a long, long time.